Welcome to Through the Eyes of Survivors. I'm your host, Tara Woodlee, and we are thankful and grateful that you're joining our podcast today. This is a podcast that is specifically geared to give support to victims and survivors of domestic violence, and we're hoping that by listening into our stories and advocacy, we are able to help bring awareness to our communities and change how we look at supporting fellow survivors out there who have endured similar situations. Today's guest is L.Y. Marlow. We're very happy to have you here today. She is a former corporate executive with over 2 decades of experience leading strategic programs in both the government and private sectors. She has seamlessly blended her corporate expertise with her passion for community service as a visionary behind Saving Promise, a national domestic violence prevention organization inspired by 5 generations of women in her family who have survived 75 years of domestic violence, including her granddaughter, Promise. LY was a pioneer of the Harvard Learning Lab, an innovative domestic violence research initiative at Harvard, T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And she has received numerous awards for leadership, advocacy, and project achievement. Additionally, LY is an award-winning author of Color Me Butterfly and other acclaimed works such as A Life Apart and Don't Look at the Monster. Her literary contributions have earned multiple awards, including the National Best Book Award. She's a sought-after empowerment speaker and advocate for intimate partner violence prevention, and LY is regularly featured in national and local media. And we're excited to have her today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Tara. You know, anytime someone read that bio, what it does for me, I am so not a bio person, but
Yes.
what I am is someone, it grounds me in the work that I've been doing for the last 18 years. The work that you and I both are passionate about, and more importantly, the conversation that we're going to have today.
Right.
So sitting through that is, you know, it just helps to ground me and get me prepared to be able to do what I've done for almost 2 decades now. And that is to talk about a topic that is not a sexy topic. It's not a topic we all like to talk about, but it is a necessary topic. And I'm really grateful for you having a platform like this to give a voice to this issue.
Well, thank you so much. I understand when people read my bio whenever I attend different podcasts or events, it's very humbling to go, did I really do that? Did I really? It doesn't seem like. And you're like, wow, I really did that. And I believe that's a big thing for survivors as you're coming out of it and becoming healthy and working to restructure what you have been through into something positive, to be able to take a healthy look back and go, wow. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you hit it right on the head. When I say it grounds me in my purpose and what I believe is a calling on my life I'm a faith-given person and, you know, faith-based. And it grounds me in what I believe God has placed a calling on my life. So
Absolutely.
it, you know, for me, it's not a bio, it is a journey. And it is a journey that I am so deeply passionate about and so deeply inspired by other survivors and those that are going to be survivors, because I believe that everyone that is hurting from this public health crisis can survive it, and more importantly, can thrive above it.
Yes, absolutely. So it was very interesting to hear because a lot of people who do follow our podcasts or know my story understand that I talk a lot about, and we've done a specific podcast on it specifically about generational abuse. That your family had we had 100 years of abuse that just started with one member of the family, and it has taken generations to overcome that. So I saw there, and they heard that in your bio. So can you tell us a little bit about that? What with your family, just briefly, have you guys strived to overcome to get you to where you are today?
What's interesting is when you were reading the bio, you mentioned that I have a book called Color Me Butterfly.
Yes.
Well, in my family, Color Me Butterfly was the first book that I decided to write because I was in corporate America. I had a health scare. Most people think that I came into this work because I wanted to break the silence, right?
Right.
Everything that your organization and your podcast stand for, and I was going to take a stand. But that's not how it happened. And that's not how it typically happens in most generational families, right?
Mhm.
It happened because I was in corporate America. I had a serious health scare, and my doctor, Dr. Lee, I'll never forget, sent me home one weekend with some harrowing news. And ultimately, what he said to me was, change your life or change your life expectancy. And I was working 80 hours a week in corporate America, and I had to make a decision. Was I
Right.
going to take Dr. Lee's advice, or was I going to do something that was going to make a difference in my life? And that difference wasn't about, breaking the silence in my family. It was, I always wanted to be an author. And so so what do you know when you decide to write a story? What you know is you know your story. So I set out to write my first book called Color Me Butterfly. It tells the story of 4 generations of mothers and daughters in my family, my grandmother, my mother, myself, and my daughter that suffered and survived over 60 plus years of domestic violence. And that book would go on to win 10 awards. And the same year that that book came out, Promise, my granddaughter, was born into this generational, what I like to believe was a curse on my family. And I've
Yes.
since changed the trajectory of that C word from a
Yes.
from a curse to a calling. And Promise was born in 2007 when Color Me Butterfly came out. And 6 months later, she would lay on the bed next to my daughter as my daughter was strangled and nearly killed for the second time by Promise's father. And it was that story that inspired me to finally walk away from that corporate career and launch Saving Promise. But here's the thing. Now we're talking 5 generations of
Yes.
domestic violence by 5 mothers and daughters. And it was our normal. It
Yes.
was our
Yes.
normal. I didn't step into this work because I was like, I'm tired of this happening to me and the women in my family and the daughters in our families. I'm gonna talk about it. I'm gonna come forward. No, it happened by a tragic incident. My daughter was almost killed for the second time. I wanted to write a book, so I wrote our story. And even writing our story, never hardly once did you hear me in that 452 pages of that book mention the word domestic violence until finally I was 17 years old. I was involved in this very abusive relationship where I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter at the time, and this person kicked me in my 8 month pregnant belly. I fell to the ground. He spit on me. He was horrifically abusing me throughout my pregnancy. And it was my supervisor that finally called me into her office because I was working a part-time job when I was in high school. And she said, I've been where you are. Let me help you. And then she started to explain to me that I was involved in a domestic violence relationship. We never even uttered that term in our family. Right? When my mother saw my grandmother being abused by my grandfather, it was, normal. when I saw my mother, I saw my mother being abused by my father, it was our normal. We didn't talk about domestic violence. It was our normal. And what we did was we kept it quiet. You know,
Yeah.
that whole slogan, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. What went on in the family stayed in the family.
Oh, yes, yes. And that is exactly what my family would say all the time. That is exact words. What goes on in the family stays in the family. And I think that is exactly how you can see that just it prolonged everything that we were experiencing, because to us, it was just another family argument.
It was another family, yes.
It was just the way our family was, you know?
Another pack of ice on the eye, another, sling with the arm, another, and what happened, of course we were ashamed. Of course we didn't talk about it, but we knew, we felt in our gut. We felt as women, as mothers, as daughters, that this isn't right. In fact, as that baby grew inside of me, and my will to survive grew alongside it, I knew that something was not right. And I remember it as though it were yesterday, Tara. I remember my mother allowed us to have boy company on Sundays, right?
Right.
The whole issue of, now being pregnant by this person and all that is yet for another show. But nonetheless, he came for boy company one Sunday, and I remember thinking, I am not going to let him do this to me one more time. And I think I was more afraid to tell my mother than I was to stand up to him, because one of the things my mother grew up learning from her own mother is when she was being abused by my grandfather, my grandmother, she ran home to her mother, and my grandmother said to her in her Southern dialect, "Go back to your husband, that's your husband," right? I didn't think my mother was going to say, "Go back to your boyfriend, that's your boyfriend." I was more concerned because she was a very nurturing and loving mother, but she was a strict mother. And she didn't allow certain things to happen in her house. And even though he didn't live in her house and I was now pregnant by this person, I was still a child. And so I was. And so I decided that I had a better way of getting out of this, standing up to him, than going to my mother. So I remember one Sunday evening, he came for boy company. I had been practicing in my room for most of the afternoon what I was going to say to him. I had this whole speech in my mind, and I remember I invited him out onto the porch, and I said to him, "What you do to me isn't right, and I'm not going to let you hurt me or my baby ever again." And that was when he lifted his still booted foot and kicked me in my 8-month pregnant belly. And I would tell you, Tara, I didn't know if my child was alive or dead until I heard her cry in about 4 weeks later in that delivery room. And so what goes on in the family stays in the family, but it is time to break the cycle, to break the silence, more importantly. And that is why I eventually wrote Don't Look at the Monster, which came later, and tell the story of Promise, because she wasn't born when I wrote Color Me Butterfly, and the story of building Saving Promise as an organization and a journey, but more importantly, my calling to inspire. If you are listening to this podcast today, if you are watching this podcast today, I want to tell you, I want to speak right to you right now, that you always deserve better, that you always can find a way out, that you can survive. And not just that relationship, because getting out is one thing, staying out is another.
Yes.
And understanding, more importantly, what we're going to be talking about today, what does healthy look like?
Exactly. So what does healthy look like?
To talk about what healthy looks like, we need to first talk about what unhealthy looks like, right?
Yes. Yes.
What unhealthy looks like is anytime, and I'll just say it in this way, and I'm not even going to look at my notes when I say this, because I say it from my heart, and I say it from a place of living and learning and knowing what it is, right? What unhealthy looks like is anytime anytime someone hurts you in any kind of way, whether or not it's verbally, emotionally, physically, if they don't respect you as a person, doesn't matter your gender, because it's not just women that are being harmed, it's men as well, right? It doesn't matter the gender, it doesn't matter your ethnicity, it doesn't matter your race. Anytime somebody does not respect you as a person, as a human being, anytime you feel that little small tightening in the bowels of your belly, like this does not feel good to me, that is what unhealthy is. If somebody makes you feel like that they have more control over you than you have of yourself, that is unhealthy. If somebody exhibiting unhealthy jealousy and possessiveness, keeping you isolated from your friends and your family, gaslighting you, I call it the make you think you crazy syndrome, right?
Yep.
That what you thought happened wasn't really what happened, or what you thought was love is love, right? That is not love. That is not love. And I want to say this to you, and especially women right now, especially women. I know this sounds a bit cliche, but love shouldn't hurt.
No, it should not.
Love should not hurt. Anytime somebody manipulate you in any kind of way, anytime somebody criticize you. Even I used to be married to a person. I didn't even know it then, because this was before I wrote Color Me Butterfly. One thing he used to do was tease me and make jokes about it, but in a very hurtful way.
Yes.
In a very hurtful way. And because he added humor to it, I didn't think it was unhealthy. So you have the power to know what unhealthy look like, because it's not about what the dictionary say. It does not mean what any kind of encyclopedia or Wikipedia says. It's what you feel inside in your heart to know that this does not feel good. This does not feel right. So let's talk about what healthy looks like. A key sign of healthy is when you feel whole in your own personal space.
Exactly.
And I mean in your physical space, right? Physical theoretically, and physical literally. If there's any pain in your body that even might be triggered, most people think, well, at least he didn't hit me or she didn't hit me. But if that emotional abuse trigger trauma, that is not healthy. And what healthy looks like is when you feel good in your body, when you feel like you have mutual respect, somebody respects you and your space. When you feel like you have open communication, that you can express yourself and not be afraid of any vindictiveness or any retribution. When you feel like you can trust someone, and I don't mean trust in terms of are they cheating or whatever, that's a different type of violation in your own relationship. I'm talking about trust when you feel like I can express myself and not feel afraid that this person is going to retaliate, not feel afraid to communicate and ask for what not only I want, but what I need, right?
Right.
And when you feel like, I think what most people think that healthy means that there's never going to be an argument. That's a myth.
No.
That's a myth, right? It doesn't mean you're not going to have a disagreement. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have an argument. It doesn't mean that you're not sometimes going to dislike this person. But what it means is, how do you, in a healthy way, be able to communicate physically, emotionally, verbally, financially? There's financial abuse.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Spiritually, how can you feel safe in all of those ways? That is what healthy looks like.
Exactly. I always like to use the example, especially with young women, some of my own trauma in the fact of, like, with my abusive partner, one of the things I'm very much proud of is I believe my grandmother taught me how to cook. I believe I'm an excellent cook, but he turned cooking into a trauma. It was never good enough. It was never, didn't like that, didn't like this. And then he would throw it away and tell me to start over. And every mealtime would be like, you know, on pins and needles. Right. And then when I got remarried and into a healthy relationship, I thought for years, I was single for a while. I thought I was over that. But the first time I had to sit and cook a meal for my husband and sit there and just wonder, oh God, is he going to like that? Is this going to become an issue? Is this going to, is this going to be, all of that comes flooding back from the unhealthy relationship, from the unhealthy things that I went through. And then he made it okay that even now, if he doesn't particularly like something, it's, well, that was good. It's not my favorite. And I can take that and go, oh, okay, and not be re-triggered into what had traumatized me before, because he made it healthy. And I worked hard to make myself healthy as well, being comfortable with my own skills again, right?
Yes.
Being comfortable with, that blessing of, I love to cook and I am a great cook, and have that as a blessing again in my life and not have that as an issue anymore. So,
sharing that part of your story, Tara, really reinforces the fact that, and I do not minimize what I'm about to say, and nor do I trivialize it, but the physical scars will heal oftentimes. Yeah. It is those emotional, traumatic scars that can take years. And thank God for your new husband, your healthy relationship, your healthy partner, and in your story, you pointed out a few things. One is, it is okay for him not to like it, right? Yeah. It's not his favorite. That's constructive feedback. That's expressing and communicating his needs and his wants and his likes and his dislikes. That is okay, right? Okay. What wasn't okay was how that same kind of situation was abused and used in a way to ultimately harm you.
Right.
To trigger you, to create a trauma for you that you would take into your future. Those are those traumatic, unhealthy experiences that can take years to heal.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm sure, like you were saying earlier, the things I love to especially tell young people, because they're so unaware of, I felt innately this was wrong. He wasn't putting his hands on me during that moment, but something about that was so wrong. It hit me to my core. And somebody's hurting you down to the core self of who you are and wrecking your confidence and how you feel about yourself. That is abuse.
That is abuse. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, just when you say down to your core, that was that same you have that little twisting in the bowels of the small of your belly, and you know how painful and hurtful it is. And there's so many people don't realize that they're in an unhealthy, abusive relationship. And it fringes on and borders on even toxic. And one thing that I have dedicated my life to do now is focusing on educating people about what does healthy look like. Because I think, even though, for example, this issue, unfortunately, is in many ways manipulated sometimes in the media, because the only time we talk about it is when a tragedy, a trauma, or someone loses their life, then it becomes newsworthy. it becomes something that we as a community tune into. And unfortunately, we don't talk about it outside of those situations. And more importantly, we don't talk about the opposite side of it, which is, well, what does healthy look like? Why can't we educate people about what does healthy look like? You know, why can't we talk to people, to our kids in school? Because generational starts very young.
Yes, it
My
does.
mother watching my grandfather, it started in 1940, before 1940, he met my grandmother in the 1930s and was very abusive. And I'm talking abuse. There's one part that I tell in my book, Color Me Butterfly, Tara, where my grandfather was so abusive. They had 8 children, 5 girls and 3 boys. And when one person did something, he would beat them all. And when my grandmother would try to intervene, he would beat her too. And he humiliated them. He would make them strip butt naked. And these are teenage girls and boys, and butt naked in front of each other, take them into the basement. And there's a story I tell where so they learned to survive in a way that they try to cover each other, right? And so there's a story I tell where my then 3-year-old uncle, Rolly, used to pee the bed. And my grandfather would come into the room in the morning just to see if he wet the bed. And so one time he did wet the bed. They didn't wake up in time to clean it up. And he came in, he made them all come down to the basement and watch him skin a rat that he caught in the trap, take this rat out of the trap, skin it, made them come up to the kitchen, made them sit down in that kitchen while he fried that rat, put it in front of that 3-year-old child and made him eat it.
Oh my goodness. In
front of them. So his abuse was not only scarring and debilitating and traumatic, it was lifelong. Out of the 8 children, 3 of them, all the boys became abusive to their wives and alcoholics. This is how generational happens. And all of the girls were in abusive relationships.
Right.
All of them. That's how come my mother ended up in a relationship, and then she had her 5 children, and and that's how it starts. And so I wanted to share that story to express and explain that the point of teaching what healthy looks like is because you have to break generations of understanding, right? Maybe because my mother never made her children eat a rat, right? But maybe she didn't realize, or my father never made his children eat a rat. Maybe she was thinking, well, at least he's not making us eat, he never beat his children. He loved his children, right? I never could remember a time my father beat on us, right? My mother, I saw that. So maybe for my mother, her attitude was, at least my children are safe. He's not harming them, and this is what healthy. This is as healthy as it's going to get for me.
Right. I liken it to in my family. I see where every generation thought they were doing better than the last.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So they thought, like you're saying, they thought, well, this is better. This is, so they felt like, they were moving forward into something better, but they didn't they weren't as good as it can get yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was the first in my generation with my mother, children and my siblings to go to college. So that's progress, right? That's progress. I would go to college. I would become a corporate executive and all that. That in the eyes of our generational experiences, like you said in your family, the next generation was better than the last, right? So now what we have to do is teach the next generation, what does healthy look like? We can't break the cycles before us, nor can we break the experiences before us, but we can break the curse of it trending into the next generation, not only by talking about it, but also by teaching our children, teaching ourselves, recalibrating our own brains around what does healthy look like.
So, how do we recalibrate that brain into something healthy?
I think it starts first with understanding and considering what defines your safe space, right?
Right.
What is your safe space? I talked a little while ago about your safe space, and your safe space is not only in your environment and your physical space, but your emotional space. What makes you feel safe? You felt safe, for example, Tara, when your new husband showed up, and although he may have not liked some of the dishes, he still expressed it in a way that did not, that you felt safe to hear that. Because safe isn't just about how safe does he feel telling you. Safe is it going to trigger that trauma again? So
Right.
that was your safe space. So how do you feel emotionally safe? How do you feel physically safe, not only in your environment, but in your body? I talked about that little small voice in the bowels of your belly. When in watching, and I was a little girl when I would see my father beat on my mother, and then later when I would become abused, I knew, when I stood up, for example, on that porch to tell him what he did to me was not right, and I wasn't going to let it happen anymore. My body was so tense delivering that news that I was sort of freezing and grounding myself for what I knew was going to come. So I did not feel safe, right, in my body, even though the punch hadn't come yet. Practicing all day, I did not feel safe because I knew I was preparing to express myself in a way that was going to trigger him, right? So the first step is you have to define what is your safe, emotionally, physically, spiritually, right? Mentally, right? What is that safe? Another way of redefining your safe is setting boundaries, right? And maybe start small. Let's say you're in a new relationship now, you're out of that past relationship, right? Boundaries is all about your safe space again. What you will and will not tolerate.
Exactly.
As a little girl, I grew up. I wrote an article years ago about called Two Faces, and Two Faces was my biological father was actually murdered when I was 5 years old. But I still remember the abuse he infliged on my mother. And I remember, some of the horrible stories that happened. About a year, 2 years later, my mother met who I say in the article, my new daddy. In the 40 plus, nearly 40 years, my mother eventually passed away from lung cancer. They were almost married nearly 40 years before she passed away. In the near 40 years that they were married, my new daddy versus my previous biological daddy, never once did I ever hear my new daddy raise his voice to my mother, let alone his hand, right? So here's a child growing up with two versions, right? But
Right.
here's the thing. When my mother started dating him and he made it known, she had 5 children. I said, any man that married a woman with 5 children and raised them as his own has to be a good man in many
Yes.
ways, right? And my mother said to him, and I wrote about it in Color Me Butterfly, she said, I cannot and I will not tolerate you hurting me in any kind of way. So if that is your intent, I'd rather be without a man. I'll
Yes.
raise my kids on my own. She set her boundaries going into that relationship, right? And he
Yeah.
never, ever put his hands on my mother. You have to set boundaries. And I don't mean just physical abusive boundaries. What are your boundaries in turn? If you enjoy a lot of women, for example, and I want to respect that men are abused as well. I'm not making this just about a women's issue, but a lot of women give up when they get into a relationship, things they love, because maybe the person doesn't enjoy it as much with them, and that's okay. If they don't enjoy it, they don't have to go with you. It is abusive when they try to isolate you from your friends and family and the things you enjoy, right? So going into any relationship, or if you're in a relationship, start to create some boundaries, right? And it might start small. And especially if you're in an abusive relationship, I want to be very careful with this, because when you're in an abusive relationship, you have to be careful, especially if this person is harmful in a way that can physically harm you. And most women, I will say, are killed by an abusive partner when they try to leave or they try to set boundaries and do things against his or her wishes. So you have to first make sure you maintain safety first all the time.
Yes.
If you're not in an abusive relationship, or you are maintaining safety, start to set some small boundaries, what you will and will not tolerate. And not so much like, I'm not going to tolerate, like my mom said to him because she was traumatized, you will not put your hands on me. But maybe it's, you know what, I used to enjoy going out with my girlfriends. I'm not going to stop going out with my girlfriends. So I'm going to let him know, look, I have girlfriends. I enjoy going out with my girlfriends. This is something I do, and I'm not going to change that. Right? Start setting boundaries, not only for your partner, but for yourself.
Yes.
Right? Create some boundaries that are going to allow you to create more positive experiences. That's another thing in terms of what does healthy look like. Especially what you did. I love your story, Tara, and that's why I keep coming back to it about cooking. Because some people just think abuse is just about the traumatic, toxic kinds of things that I shared, some of the stories about my grandfather and my experience, and even some of your experiences. But even cooking became a trauma, you said.
Yes.
Right? And so creating positive experiences, by that becoming a trauma, that narrative was already in your mind. You said, I was nervous when I first cooked for my new husband. I wasn't sure how he was going to receive it, and more importantly, how he was going to express it. Right? So that trauma, what you have to do is start changing that narrative by replacing it with more positive experiences. You are the only person that can change your experiences. You can't change the other person. You can express your needs. You can express your wants. You can set boundaries. You can set what you will and will not tolerate, but you are not in control of their behaviors. What you are in control of is your own. So start creating new positive experiences, and more importantly, find out who your people are when you start to seek support. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a relative, a sister, a brother, maybe it's a support group, it's a network, that group of women that you like to go out with occasionally for girls' night. Maybe one of them is someone you can trust. You have to have someone that you can lean. I love when what was her name, Cheryl from the Facebook, when she had that whole lean in movement.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Lean in was more about your corporate experiences and your work and your careers and stuff like that. But who is your lean in person or persons that you can lean into and be completely vulnerable, be completely open, and not be ashamed?
Absolutely. We, my husband and I, when we first started dating, and we had known each other previously. So you can do this with people, I'd known him for a very long time. And we still, when we were dating, he had some trauma going on too from a previous marriage. It was abusive in a way from cheating, that kind of thing. And I had my own, but we had very detailed conversations. We called deal breaker conversations. Well, this here would be a deal breaker. Okay, why would it be a deal breaker? Because of X, Y, Z, because like the cooking, because this would be, very hurtful to me because I'm very proud of how I do this and stuff, and it would affect me. And what were the consequences? Because a lot of people throw out divorce, divorce, divorce on everything, but some deal breakers are like, it's not a divorce type of thing, but letting each other know I would lose respect for you. How I would feel about you. and what kind of how I would be able to be safe and vulnerable with you, and having those conversations and agreeing on certain terms of there's the absolute deal breakers. What was us figuring out what were absolute deal breakers and what were things that were going to be in that line of, it may not be a deal breaker, but I would lose respect for you. I don't know if I would function well under these circumstances. And what does it look like if something within our deal breakers change? And that's one thing that we did have to face later on. I mean, after my daughter's death at the hands of her partner, my husband was a smoker. And it was actually one of his deal breakers. I do not want a woman to tell me I can or can't smoke, right? And at that time, I was good with, as long as you're not doing it in the house, you go outside and smoke. Okay, I do that. But after she died, I became very innately upset about, how does this affect his health? Would I have him much longer? Would I be dealing with him? Would I be burying him? It made me very much afraid. And we had to come back and have that conversation. And I went, I know that you said it was a deal breaker, but we've got to revisit this conversation because I feel so anxious and upset that we've got to renegotiate this because it makes me fearful for my future, for our health, for our life together. And he quit smoking.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it took him quite a while that he started working on that, because certain events in your life happen, that sometimes things within your life change. So
Absolutely.
that the place you thought was healthy in that moment might have to change in another moment.
Absolutely. You know, I love the concept of what are your deal breakers, right? And I remember doing an exercise when I finally got the courage to get out and date over, several times, putting together, a 3 columns of, what was an absolute deal breaker, what was negotiable, because let me say this, no partner is perfect. Right. So there might be some negotiables, and then what are, the area that I must have.
Right. So in light of what we've been talking about with our conversation about what is healthy, what is unhealthy, and how to recognize that, what would be like your final thoughts that you would want the audience to know out there about relationships and domestic violence?
I think, Tara, just summarizing everything we've already said, and I want to simplify it as best I can, because I want to really just talk to the listeners, the viewers, and just say that if something doesn't feel right, it's not right, right? You know, despite whether or not we come from generational abuse, or is our normal, is our, is some of our deal breakers, or, negotiators, or things are must-haves. At the end of the day, I'll summarize it in something that Maya Angelou once said, and it was a light bulb moment for me in my journey. She said, when someone shows you who they are the first time, believe them.
Absolutely.
When someone shows you who they are the first time, and that first time may be, that first date, and they might do something. I won't give example because I don't want you to think, oh, if they did that, that's what it means, right? It's when you have that little small voice in the pit of your belly on that first date, and you get that little believe them.
Absolutely.
Believe them. And I'll close on that point with a real story. My daughter, who actually turned 40 2 days ago, suffer from many traumas from being in relationship after relationship after relationship of abuse. So she did the work to restore her faith in herself, right? Because she can't control other people, but she can control is herself. She did the work, and and some of her work was even reestablishing her own self-confidence, her own self-worth, her own self-esteem. In that period of her doing her work, one of the things that she accomplished, she became a registered nurse, an RN. She, got her own home. She really, really worked hard to set her own deal breakers with herself. Right.
Yes.
So she started dating, and she told me she went on this date, and that night, towards the end of the date, when they were ready to leave, it was a date. She met somebody online. I wouldn't say a blind date, but somebody she didn't know. At the end of that date, she said, "Well, I really enjoyed this. How was it for you?" And he said, "Well, it was okay, but I just felt like you didn't pay attention to me enough."
Whoa, there you go.
When somebody shows you who they are the first time, he didn't hit her, he didn't call her name, he didn't verbally abuse her, he didn't do any of that. Now, oftentimes, when she called me that night because I was excited about this day, he sounded like the perfect guy for her. He was in healthcare, he was, had all the boxes checked in terms of good job, all stuff that the stuff that we look for that says this is a good guy, right?
Yes.
Had a daughter around her age and around her daughter's age, and everything, the boxes checked. But at the end, and he was great throughout the date. But at the end of the day, when she expressed like, "I really enjoyed this, I really, like this or whatever, how about you?" And he said, "You didn't pay attention to me enough." When someone shows you who they are the first time, believe them. And by the third date, he already started to be, she talked herself out of it. Like, well, maybe he just meant that I wasn't, because I was shy. And we start to tell ourselves, create this narrative.
We tried to rationalize what
rationalize it. Yes. Yes. So I will leave you all with that story and that amazing words of wisdom from Maya Angelou. When someone tells you or shows you who they are the first time, believe them. And the final thing that I would share is that I mentioned at the top of the discussion that one of the things that I'm on a mission about is a new initiative that Saving Promise launched called Only 11 Minutes.
Yes.
To educate people about what does healthy look like in only 11 minutes. And the reason for only 11 minutes is because there's been some harrowing research that came out from the United Nations, in fact, that every 11 minutes, a woman or girl is killed by a family member or abusive partner. Yes. And I said to myself, how can we change the trajectory of that and do something more positive in those 11 minutes? So we put together a program, an initiative called Only 11 Minutes, where we are educating grassroots communities, not only about intimate partner violence, but what does healthy look like? What does healthy look like? And we are launching and have launched a new quiz called How Healthy Is Your Relationship? And if you go to savingpromise.org, it'll pop up, or you look under education, under the menu called education, or on our homepage, and it says, are you in a healthy relationship? If you are in a healthy relationship, but you want to do a pulse check, or you want to learn a little bit more about how to maintain or up-level that relationship, if you're questioning your current relationship, Or if you are in an abusive relationship or you don't know, take that quiz. It's a free quiz. How healthy is your relationship? Get educated with the Only 11 Minutes course. It literally takes only 11 minutes
Right.
to learn what does healthy look like and are you in a healthy relationship?
That's awesome. That is awesome. And we will have that link down in the bio and description down below here on the YouTube channel. So please be sure you click on that and take that and share it with your friends. So
Thank
absolutely.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you for that. Yes.
Yes, it's important. It's important. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a true joy to have you. I hope you'll come back and discuss some other things as your organization's growing and how that initiative is going. I'd love to hear about that.
I would love to. I would love to come back and just do a, you know how you do a marathon walk, right? Well, we'll
Yes.
do a marathon quiz to get as many people as we can and talking about it, and they can share their feedback. Maybe I'll convince you to do a YouTube live
Yes, I would love
podcast. And
that.
let's do how healthy are you in a healthy relationship marathon and just get people
Oh,
talking. You
yes.
know, what was your
Yes.
score? You don't have to say who your name was because it's going to give you back one of four responses. Very healthy, and maybe we say to people, okay, if you got a very healthy, tell us what makes your relationship very healthy. Not
Yeah.
so healthy. Oh, healthy, but it might say you're in a healthy relationship, but these are things
Right.
you can do. Not so healthy and unhealthy. And maybe we have that live YouTube. I want to do a how healthy are
Let's try
you?
to do it in February around Valentine's when people are focused on their
I would
relationship.
love to do that. And we
I
do
would
a
love to
live
as well.
YouTube
So
channel.
everybody look forward to that.
I'm
So
looking forward to it. We're going to do
yeah,
it, Tara. Thank you so much for having me.
thank you.
Anytime you want me, I am yours, and we're going to do that marathon.
Yes, we are. Absolutely.
All
Thank
right.
you. Well, this concludes this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. Please be sure to like, comment, and share the podcast. And join us next time. And we look forward to challenging your conceptions of what domestic violence really is. So stay tuned.